I prefer the reality of it.
Yeah.
And so feeling like I'm in some other world where I can say things that are stupid, make me nervous.
That's the best part about podcasting is we have like an hour or so to talk about stupid things.
So either way, you're going to pull out something stupid.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Intentionally.
That's
Nice. And then we could clip of it and just play it over and over.
Right.
No, we don't do that.
So you guys were on the East Coast?
We were. We both... we were both there in the 90s. So Jenny went to Columbia undergrad,
Okay.
and I went to Kansas for undergrad, and then I went to the East Coast in 96. She was already there. And so then she was in New York. She went to the GSD. I was in New York for 3 years, and then I went to the GSD. So we met up at the point where we would both come out of the GSD at the same time, and then we went back to New York for 3 years.
Okay.
So until 2004.
So in New York for 3 years practicing and just surviving in the city.
Yeah. Yeah, we worked for, we were both teaching and we were both working for offices at that time. Yeah.
Very cool. And you got out after 3 years.
We did get out, yeah. I actually didn't want to come.
Really?
I had this well, Jenny's from LA. So for her, it was, she said from the day we met, I'm going back to LA at some point. We both loved New York, but she was set, she was coming back.
Right.
And I had this weird impression of what LA was. And I know where it came from. If you grow up in the Midwest in the late 70s, early 80s, your idea of a big city is not so great because you're dealing, all Midwestern cities were like this. So Wichita, Joplin, Tulsa, Kansas City in the 70s and 80s, the downtowns in those cities were not places you wanted to be. And I was from a very small town, so those were the big, scary cities. And so I envisioned LA as one of those times, on steroids.
Right. Unsafe, you mean?
Unsafe, and people didn't live in the center of the city. They just weren't, at that time, places where people lived. They lacked the vitality that a great city does. Mm-hmm. That's not true anymore. Sure. It hasn't been for a very long time. Yeah. But at that time, I hadn't yet. Right.
But you were okay with New York, though.
Yes, I loved New York, so I didn't want to come to LA because I was quite happy in New York, and I just was uncertain what LA would bring. But Jenny was very positive
from day one.
And I got to say, I just sort of said to myself, well, I'll be in LA for a couple years and I'll grow into it, and I'll learn to love it. But I loved it from the day I arrived.
Oh,
really?
It was everything in an odd way, it was a perfect cross between everything I loved about Kansas and the culture of New York that I loved. So
because it's not as dense as New York, but still has an urban component.
Well, it still feels like a city. It's a different kind of city, but it still feels dense. It feels like a city in the sense that there's cultural diversity everywhere. There was a culture of architecture. And for us, that specifically meant SCI-Arc. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So we were surrounded by colleagues who were talking about architecture in ways that didn't exist in places before we went to the East Coast. So more than anything, it was the culture of a big city that felt right. But it also, I for many years swore off this idea of owning a home and having a backyard, and I thought I don't care about any of that stuff. Yeah. But when we came back to LA, and we rented at first because we were very much like, let's create our own little New York apartment. So we lived in the American Cement building, great building. We were quite happy there, but eventually went on to buy the building that we're in now, and it was less about a sense of like owning your own piece of earth and more about like, I have a thing that I can transform probably for the rest of my life. And that sense of like, the investment going toward your own thing really meant something.
So are you guys like in a single family house, or it's an apartment, or?
We own a building that we, on a commercial street on Hyperion, and we live upstairs and we work, the office is downstairs. So it's sort of perfect. And it's, if you know the building, when we got it, this was 2009, it was a really horrible Spanish style building. That was actually moved there, I believe, it was more or less in the middle of the 5 freeway. And when they built the freeway, they moved this building. They split it in half. They moved the building to Hyperion. Anyway, it was horrible. And we every year have kind of transformed this building in some way. So the first year, and it's always been, if we had enough money to do something, that would sort of gauge what we could do. So one year we just made it livable and like a modern box. We added a fence one year. We added a canopy another year. We added a treehouse another year. We had a kid, and we added a couple of bedrooms. This year, the office will grow. So, and you can look around I think it's somewhat coherent, but you can sort of see like, oh, here's where they were with their ideas.
Right. You have to have little placards that say like the date at which this addition happened or whatever.
Exactly.
That's really cool. I mean, I feel like that's a common dream for architects to have a house or a property or building. To own it, of course, but mostly just to have an ongoing project.
Right.
And the amount of meaning that gets embedded into it, it's got to be amazing after
Absolutely.
How many years,
Absolutely. Yeah, an interesting thing just happened. We built this project called 3DS Culinary 5 years ago, and they're no longer in that space. And so when they left the space, this just happened a few months ago. They called us and said, "Hey, with that project, there was the renovation of the building, and then there were several components that we built ourselves. Mm-hmm. And when it came out, they said, "Hey, we've got these pieces that they're going to take out. Do you have any ideas where they could go?" And I said, "I'm going to get in my truck and I'm going to come there right now." And so we hauled all that stuff out of there, and we've been slowly kind of reworking it and reconfiguring it to be a part of our own studio. So it's amazing, like, the amount of effort that we put into that from a cost standpoint and time and energy. We would never do it if it was just for ourselves. But now we're getting this amazing.
That's awesome.
Piece back.
Is the proximity between work and home difficult if you live right above where your office is?
Like, you can be late to work, right? Like, everybody's downstairs and,
Well, you can, but it's probably not the best sign to send the office. No, a lot of colleagues really couldn't say to us that they couldn't do it this way, that they want that separation. We're exactly the opposite. We think that having them together is absolutely essential. When we were in the American Cement Building, we had our office and our home there, and that was all in one space, and that was that did get to be difficult, and it was. The one thing I always point to that was uncomfortable about it was it'd be 10 o'clock at night. It's time to eat, and you just feel awkward cooking your food while people are working there. So at least with the office now, you have to go outside to go upstairs. There's a stair outside, so there is some amount of separation. And now that we have kids, I think everyone sort of recognizes that we've got to go up and put the kids to bed. So normally we go up there and are usually back down at some point. But
yeah, I feel like that little bit of separation from even on separate stories, right? You said like the living's above. That's pretty crucial. Yeah. In New York, we had a 1-bedroom apartment at the end of our time there, and we would do side projects, competitions, things like this. And it's a 1-bedroom. It was a nice 1-bedroom for sure, but still, it's New York. It's not the biggest place.
Right.
And after like 3 or 4 days of constant working, living, and using the bathroom, everything happens in one space. You kind of start to feel like this is starting to get unhealthy, and those lines get blurred super quick if you're dedicated to the work.
Yeah. Well, our we've always felt like the closer we could put those things together, the more productive we would be. Like we both have said for a very long time that we had a plan for how to deal with this problem of being an absent parent architect, and it was that we were going to have our home and our office. Mm-hmm. So our kids are constantly in the office because they're going up and down and out. So they come in the office for a couple minutes a day. I just feel like the kids they're part of the office, and if I can't imagine. If those two were separated, for one, I'd miss my kids a lot, but my kids would miss us, and so it's perfect.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I can't imagine. I mean, we don't have kids, but I've always wondered, when parents have jobs and they architects or anything else, and they work from 9 to 7 or 8. Like, when do you see your kids? I mean, my parents were always around when I was growing up, but then it occurred to me after at some point, like, this is probably not that common. Actually, most parents don't even see their kids like the majority of the day. It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
How old are they?
3 and 6.
Oh, wow. So is the 6-year-old entering school yet?
Yeah, one is in a daycare a few hours in the morning that we walk to, and the others are in elementary school that we walk. So we walk out the gate in the morning. We both walk in opposite directions to take the kids to school.
I saw online on Instagram that you had made a series or a number of tricycles and things like this for your kids. And that's like really, really awesome. But also because the craftsmanship is high level. And this is something that ties into your work, of course, is, I mean, you're an architect. You draw, you design, you do these blue lines, which are also amazing.
Thank you.
Which cause me to sweat when I see them. But then you also can build stuff, and you've made these tricycles, which are really amazing, and all the work that you do. Can you talk about that? Because this is not a common skill set for most people and most architects, even I would probably say.
Right.
So where does it come from?
I just love making things in general, of all kinds, And I mean of all kinds, meaning, it doesn't have to be high order architecture for me to love making it. I enjoy making all of those things if there's a sense of design about them. Where does it come from? I think it comes from growing up in a family that did that thing. My dad my earliest memories of my dad are him making things.
Oh, really?
He also had a house. I think we were like a 1-bedroom, 800 square foot house at some point when I was born, and now it's quite a big house with 4 or 5 bedrooms. And every time a kid, I'm from a family of 5 kids, so every time a kid was born, another addition happened.
Add on a room.
Yeah, they said to me just a couple of days ago that they've spent their whole life working on that house.
Yeah.
They've just never stopped, and it's not that they necessarily always needed it. Maybe they needed it when a new kid came, but there's just a work ethic about continually making and improving. So when our kids were born, I should say about also, my dad was a cast iron foundry worker. He retired a couple of years ago.
A cast iron foundry worker.
Wow.
Yeah, they pour castings for things like Caterpillar. They're cast iron.
Wow.
Usually incredibly intricate pieces with sort of voids in them that are quite complex. And so that was a place all of me and my brothers all worked when we got out of high school. So there was both my dad at home. Normally he was working with wood and doing sort of conventional construction, but there was also the metal aspect of it that was happening at the foundry.
Yeah, metalwork is a whole different ballgame. I'm more familiar with, I won't even say woodworking, but using wood to make things. But metal is a totally different beast, and it seems like you're pretty adept at both.
Yeah, back to the East Coast thing. When we went to the East Coast, you go to architecture school, or I went to architecture school, and there was very much I made things in architecture school from day one, but I somehow came to disconnect those more I don't know what to call them, sort of manual labor skills from the kind of skills I was learning in school. And when we went to the East Coast, it was almost like I forgot I knew how to do a lot of that stuff. And when we got out here and we just had the space and the support of SCI-Arc to start making this stuff again, I definitely called on a lot of the skills that I knew growing up. But I will say that with the metalwork, although I had worked in this cast iron foundry and I had been around this stuff that my dad did my whole life, I'd never learned to weld. I think people assume I've known how to do that stuff my whole life, and I haven't. Growing up around people working with that sort of thing, I basically was not afraid of it, so it just didn't intimidate me when somebody said it's going to be out of metal. And when we did our first metal project, this density fields project at Materials and Applications, it was pretty naturally going to be a metal project, and when they asked how we were going to do it, I said, well, I'm going to weld it. And they said, oh, you must be a good welder. And I said, no, I have no idea. So I paid a friend $100 to give me a couple-hour tutorial, and I worked really hard at it for a few weeks, learning how to do it well and to not punch holes in the aluminum, and I learned out of aluminum first.
It's different for aluminum, though.
It's different. It's more difficult. It moves in different ways, but it turns out if you learn how to do it with aluminum, it's a lot easier to weld steel. So
I had only taken like a metal shop class in like undergraduate, one of these courses, and it was like a first year course. It might have actually been combined with woodworking, which
right.
At that point I don't know. I guess it's useful for some people who don't know how to hold a hammer, but beyond that, and it was just the thing that kind of freaked me out was it felt much more dangerous than working with wood, and also there doesn't seem to be a lot of like leeway. Like wood, you can kind of massage to do this or that. You can sand it, you can sculpt it easier. It's much more forgiving. But I remember like with the project, it's like once you tack something together, like, well, that's kind of it. I don't know how much like wiggle room I have after I do this. I guess that's what the piece is going to be now.
Right. I don't know if that's entirely true.
Okay.
If you drill a hole in steel, you can weld over that hole and grind it right back. It's going to take some work polishing it, but you get it right back to the way it was. With wood, there's no hiding that hole.
Gotcha.
So I actually kind of look at it in a different way. I think that steel can actually be more forgiving.
Really?
A welding table is just made out of a big plate of steel, and you're cutting and grinding it all day long, and you just fill it back up when you get a big gouge in it.
Interesting. And the other thing I was wondering is this kind of tension or difference between the manual labor, right, that you're kind of talking about, and what a lot of designers, architects do, which is the drafting of things or computer modeling of things. And it's kind of fascinating to me because it seems like some students and some people they kind of think that because computer design has become much more prevalent, that we're actually moving away from having to do manual labor. And this ties into maybe people assuming that, well, we have 3D printers, we have other things that can shorten the construction process where we can just skip over some of the building stuff by hand. I don't know if that's true or false, but I think that's kind of one way of looking at it. But the work that you guys do seems to be computational in its form and design, but a lot of it is like you and students or people that work for you, grinding and welding like each individual piece by hand.
Right.
That's pretty radical.
It is what it is. A lot of that's come out of necessity. That the way to get it built was to do it in that way. I don't know. There is definitely a mentality that now that we have 3D printers and certain technologies that we should rely on them for everything. And a lot of times that's a really smart thing to do. A lot of times it doesn't make any sense at all. And I've said way too many times about things. I could do that 10 times faster if I just picked it up and made it, then you're going to be able to do it digitally modeling it and then printing it. Because people think, well, the 3D printer takes that long. Yeah, but you have to digitally model it and get it right and send it to the printer and then deal with the problem that came up with the printer. Yeah. And then you ran out of filament and the power went out. And, I'm pretty good at gauging how long it would take to make something if I don't have to deal with technology. Now, we have relied on technology for tons and tons of things. And it's ironic that if you go to our office, despite having this insistence on using technology for so many things and having a 3D printing jewelry company that's within the office, if you look around at the models in the office, and it's full of them, the overwhelming majority of them are not 3D printed. And usually that comes from either recognizing that we've figured out a really smart way to make it by hand, or that there's a quality difference making it by hand, or probably more often than those, the idea that if we're ready to 3D print it, we're probably done.
Right.
We at that point it's designed. We know what it looks like. We don't need the model. So we're at a funny moment now where I am still always really wanting to use the physical models as an intuitive way of designing and making decisions. I think it forces a level of thought that doesn't come with the digital modeling, and you see it in a more intimate spatial way. I do, and I'm often still really insisting on that in the office, and I've got to get over it because we're reaching the point, or have reached the point, where people modeling digitally can see it in the same way. But
because of the advancement of the technology,
because of just their fluency,
right.
like they've
right.
learned to see it as an extension of their own hands.
Yeah.
And I still work in a different way, and I still think in most cases faster than some. I could still make the design and build the model faster as one integrated thing. But there are people in the office that's not the case. They can work extremely fast, extremely fluently, and then they don't have to. They can output it,
right,
and it's done.
Assuming the printer doesn't screw up.
Yeah, and the power doesn't go out, and all that stuff.
So the kind of models that you're talking about when you're working by hand, is one of the benefits being able to tear it apart and morph it more easily than a 3D printed thing? Because a 3D printed model is pretty. Now the plastic's pretty hard. It's pretty fixed. It's not easy to modify after you've printed it. It's more like you have to go back, change the computer model, print the next version, as opposed to manipulating the actual thing.
There's a couple things. One is just the making of the model is, on one hand, intuitive. On the other hand, you have to make really deliberate decisions when you put the glue on there in a way that the digital model just allows for a sort of endless variation. You're not forcing yourself to make the same kind of unchangeable decision. Obviously, it can be changed, but I like that process of forcing you into making these deliberate moves. The other problem that's maybe more specific to the work is that so much of the work has been line-based in the office, and a lot of the desktop printers they don't do that super well.
Yeah.
And when they do, they're not clean. Yeah. You don't get a crispy line.
Right.
So,
right.
And we have a handful of models in the office that we've sent off, and they come back perfect, but there's a 3-week delay.
And I know we've talked to different architects about this issue, and people from an older generation kind of have their preferences, but they're also open to people do it differently now. But the question of whether or not doing things by hand, or at least learning the skills or going through that process in school, provides some kind of other advantages to a person as a designer, even if when they start their own office, they're not actually the ones doing the model making anymore. Do you know what I mean? Kind of like, I've always wondered, is having the knowledge of being able to make things by hand and the knowledge of carpentry to a decent level, if that somehow informs whether or not a person can be a successful designer, even if they don't do that in the day-to-day once they start practicing.
I don't think it's necessary per se. Meaning, if a person doesn't know how to do that, that doesn't mean they don't have great abilities to do everything.
Sure.
But you don't hone your sensibility about how to put things together without working on that. And there are other ways that could happen other than sort of physically holding those things in your hand. But there is a really intimate understanding of parts in front of you when they're in front of you, and you understand their intricacies, the way they fit together, when you can shuffle them 1,000 ways within a few seconds in order to understand the ways those go together. Making things by hand often helps you hone those skills. Anyone who doesn't think that, I would never say that like doing something by hand is overall a better way. It just makes it seems like we're over that conversation years and years ago. I just think that both of them have working digitally and working by hand. If you can learn to hone your skills in both ways, there are commonalities between them, and there are things that both of them do incredibly well. And if you can figure out how to get the strength out of both of them, put toward a single project, you're far better off than working with one.
Yeah, one of the things you said that was really interesting is that when you're working by hand, there's a kind of a finality to a certain degree for the steps you take. So if you glue something together, now you have to deal with what you just did.
Right.
And if you're using MaxSecure, then it's not coming apart. Very specific reference there. And that's really fascinating. And I think that is, on the one hand, could be perceived as like really limiting, right? But is maybe more freeing in the sense that alternatively in the computer, you can keep doing things over and over. And at least for myself, I found, and myself and other designers I've seen, it's a trap you can fall into very easily. Yep. Because it's, abstract space. You have this thing and you manipulate, and like hours go by and you totally forget. There's no like sense of history of what things you've done. And even if you copy files and copy models, somehow an understanding of like building upon previous design decisions doesn't happen sometimes, and you just get kind of lost in like, where am I exactly? It's 2:00 in the morning now, and I'm not quite sure what steps I've been through.
There's a particularly in school, there's often a feeling that we're spending too much time. A student would say, why do we have to make a model at this stage? Like, we kind of know where we are. Why are we doing this for the presentation? And there's some truth to that. But for me, the making of the models and having to meet these deadlines and pin up again, it really is about forcing people into a benchmark that forces decisions. So you model it all digitally with knowing full well that you've got to meet that deadline, and it's got to produce, it's got to output itself in a physical thing, and that without having to make that by hand, it has the same outcome in that there's as you put it, a finality to it. So I'm just a believer in having to deal with the decisions that you make. I see a lot of Jenny likes to call it design constipation. That's
what does that mean?
Meaning that people are sort of either completely stuck and don't know what to do, or they have so many things they could do, but are unable to make decisions about which ones are the right ones. And I often think there aren't necessarily right ones. There are paths that you can sort of build on and that can grow, and you have to force yourself into making those decisions. Yeah,
but the important thing is to have to make those decisions and then see them. Right. And it's a weird thing. I mean, so like when I was a student, I had a bad case of design constipation for both in both ways. And I had the same mentality as you just described. It's like, but I'm still designing. I have my design. Like, I don't need the pin up and yada yada yada. And then after like many years of that, and I don't know, at some point, probably when I started teaching, I realized like, oh, actually, like having a deadline, it's not about showing the perfect final design at all. It's just about it's almost like, just by the fact of pinning up something, either formal presentation or more informal, it's like now whatever you've done, good or bad, becomes like a solid base of knowledge. And at least you know where you are. If it's bad, then you change direction. If it's good, then you work off of it. But unless you have that like concrete, it's just chaos, I feel like,
Yeah, for me, there's also a hope that in having to make the thing, that there will become a sort of love of that making and production and having created a thing or made a thing that will make a difference. Like for me, I often don't enjoy what I'm working on until I decide, oh, I'm gonna make this thing. I'm gonna, in some way produce. I keep saying making, but sometimes the making is drawing or like literally letting someone else produce it. But the idea that it went from nothing to a thing that is in front of me is really there's a great sense of accomplishment that comes with that. And so I find that the greatest reward is often figuring out what the next thing would be that could manifest itself physically, and that will help drive the project. Like getting excited about a model or a study or a drawing or a weird mix of those things. Those are the most exciting moments of a project.
So you have your office right now, and you guys have done a bunch of work, and you've done a few larger projects as well in an eastern place. I don't remember.
Taiwan. Yeah.
Okay, there.
Taiwan.
I knew it started with a T. I was going to say Taipei, but I don't think that's right. Okay, in Taiwan,
yeah.
right?
No, they're in Taipei.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, they are?
Yeah.
Okay. Then I was right. And I think it's interesting because, in the research, and I've seen you guys talk, there's this balancing between more experimental, you could call it, kind of in architectural investigations, and then tying that to larger projects. And it's your guys' ambition to do larger works and have some kind of through line between those two scales, right, or through whatever differences you would call them, right?
Exactly. Right. Yeah. The hope is that the things that the work on the tricycles, that's going to the far end. The work on the jewelry, let's say, can find its way into ways of thinking about the building, and we're trying to make objects at every scale. So some are sort of conceptual experiments, like these active inlay models that we've made for the last few years. We've tried applying those at every scale, and it's still sort of a test. So we've made several pieces of furniture, and none of these are where they're not happening in sequence, so it doesn't go from small and work its way up.
It'd be nice if it did.
Yeah, it'd be an easier story. But we've done everything from we did a museum competition that tried to build on these ideas, to several pieces of furniture, to many of the ideas. We're working on a co-working space now on West Jefferson, where a lot of those ideas are getting incorporated.
Is it difficult to translate these ideas or principles, or I don't know how you would describe them, to a larger scale? Because inherently something's going to have to change, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, they do have to change. That's what's interesting. Like, are they... Early on, when we were working on this line stuff, we did a lot of projects that were like, okay, now let's try this on a large building, and it just didn't work. And we often say that when we look back at those early ones, we were glad so many of them didn't get built, because it might have been an interesting test, but they would have failed on many levels to us. And the same thing applies to these more volumetric ideas. You've always got to ask yourself, when you blow something up 100 times in some cases, what is that thing now? Right. What is it? Because it's no longer a chunk or a piece of structure. It's a whole thing. Is it a spatial device? How is it interpreted? What does it mean when it exists in the city? It's a whole other thing. And so I think that's part of what's interesting is blowing them up, asking what they are now, how they're received or interpreted, and are you happy with that? If not, what needs to happen that still sort of maintains their conceptual basis or conception? Or can that happen? If not, have you reached a limit? And there are limits for many. A lot of the line-based stuff, I feel like there is a limit.
A limit in what sense? Because you mean like you can't just blow it up and it doesn't work?
Right.
Or limit,
right. For some of particularly the application. So when we were looking at some of the line-based projects that were happening about the entirely line-based, happening at the same time as the development of the first tower in Taipei, we simply couldn't scale those up, especially for a residential project. It's just it wasn't plausible. It didn't make sense structurally. It's not necessarily the problem of. It's not really the architectural problem of residential housing, which just naturally wants to be a mass. It wants to provide interiority. There's a clear sense usually between enclosure and between the inside and outside. So the skin, the balconies, to us, those were the problems. So we looked to where these line-based solutions might apply, where they had to be translated into more planar elements or thought of in terms of thickness applied to facade. The spatial problem of pure line, it wasn't a perfect fit.
Interesting.
So, and I think having taken on that problem, that's where the work, in a way, finding the limits of those issues are where the work grows.
Right.
Like the work changed at that point for that building, but it brought with it a lot of different ideas. So in that building, like we've now come, and when we go back to that building and we ask like what really works about this building, we often reference the idea that from the ground, the most interesting thing about the building is that there isn't a really clear sense of enclosure. So if you go to most residential buildings, particularly big ones, tall ones, there's a very clear distinction between the inside and the outside. Begins here, ends here. You might have some balconies, but they very much belong to the mass of the building. And in the Monarch building in Taipei, there's a really thick 6-foot deep facade. And exactly where the line of enclosure for the building begins, it's a little ambiguous. And I had always been reluctant to. I've never loved the idea of working on taller buildings, primarily because they often lack a spatial sensibility, you know. And in a way, thinking about the building in that way as having this deep facade and an ambiguous sense of enclosure, suddenly the sense of spatial engagement with the building with a tall building, we've found a way into that. So it does feel spatial from the ground. So
how many floors is it? It's
16.
Oh, nice.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I have the same feelings. I mean, about a lot of taller buildings. It's interesting. For a long time, that's what I wanted to do. Like, I want to do towers. I worked in a few towers. I'm like, this is kind of boring now. Because especially in a place like New York or a lot of places in across the world, you maximize square footage, you know, and maybe you do some kind of minor twist or here or there, but you still have to maintain that number. That number of square feet has to be there for sure. And then, you know, we would like model things in the office that have like a 2.5 foot deep, like frames and things flying out. And like, but can we just push the boundary out and have a bigger apartment? We could, but let me tell you why I want 2 feet of whatever. Like, no. Just, you have 12 inches to play with. Like, okay, well, that that changes the whole thing. And it can get frustrating after.
Yeah, well, the fundamental issue is if someone's building a tower, it's because every square inch mattered.
Yeah.
And, you know, and they're usually spending a lot of money on it.
Yeah, this is true.
And the numbers have to work.
Yeah.
We did find at the end of it some really interesting things came out of it. We worked with an amazing developer called Jut there, and they were very skeptical about, at least the sales department, about whether or not this would work. Because it was not the type of if you go around Taipei, they're clearly the best residential developer in Taipei, but they hadn't done a residential building that's this modern at all.
Right.
And Jenny is amazing there at helping them understand that this building is going to work. And in the end, the building sold very well. And maybe what's most interesting about it is that the demographic of the buyers of the building are younger than their previous clients, which is a good sign. You know, not only did they sell it, but it helped them recognize that there's actually another market out there that potentially gets tapped into by building this kind of work.
That's one of the big questions is if you do more, I don't know, forward-thinking or modern, different, you know, or avant-garde, as the general public might call it, work. How do you convince a developer when they are sinking a ton of money at their own risk, you know, into a project? That's like $1 million question almost. Yeah. We'll have to ask her when she comes.
Well, architects that are really good figure out, I think, how to couple the things that they're doing with a value.
Right.
Yeah. If you can't do that, it's a pretty tough sell.
And so the majority of your work in the office currently, is it all over the map in terms of, you know, type and scale?
Definitely. Definitely.
Still?
Yeah, no, that's what's interesting about it is we're working on a table. We're working on, Jenny's working on jewelry every day for part of the day.
Right.
But then we're working on LA River. We've just started doing a lot more jobs with the city of LA. If you'd have asked 10 years ago, you know, the kind of things we might be doing now, I wouldn't have put that on the list. It just wouldn't have come to mind. But it turns out a lot of that work is a really perfect fit for the office, like infrastructural type work. We're working on a bridge in Pacoima. We're working on a couple of retaining walls on Soto Street. Things that essentially haven't really been thought of as having the potential to be a public amenity. But the city has recognized that there's that these could be if design became an important aspect of them.
Is that when you guys were brought on for I forget the title of the project, LA River?
The LA River Bikeway.
Right.
Yeah.
Was that once Christopher Hawthorne came into position? I think you guys were elected before that, I think. I don't remember.
I don't know. I don't know that there were. It was about around the same time,
right.
But I don't think the two were directly connected.
Gotcha.
But the mayor's office is involved in the the development of that, and there's often a great representative from the mayor's office.
Yeah, it seems like the mayor is quite interested in architecture and upping the city's game as far as that goes, which is pretty phenomenal for everyone that's here that's an architect.
Yeah, there's also a woman named Deborah Weintraub, who you may know, who's she's in the Bureau of Engineering. As I understand it, the highest-ranking architect in the city of LA, I think, who is a huge supporter of design, who I think really has a vision for a very design-oriented city that, she seems to have her hands in everything and has been supportive of us and a lot of designers.
LA is definitely your home at this point. It doesn't sound like you're going to be leaving anytime soon.
No, we're not going anywhere.
Are you doing more work in Asia?
Yes, we've just begun another tower.
Wow.
Very similar in size to the first one. Yeah.
Do you feel like... I feel like Asian countries are often way more open to more experimental design than sometimes, I don't know, European or even American city. Do you feel like that's the case?
Without trying to grossly overgeneralize, but just as a conversational topic,
Well, I think the reason I'm hesitating answering that is because our experience has been primarily Taipei,
right?
Which I wouldn't really classify as it being more open to anything. It's until the last, say, 10 years, Taipei hasn't really been known as a center of architecture. There's some great things there, but it's just in the last 10 years you've started to see these competitions that great architects are winning. But the culture of building development within Taipei has not been that interesting. And they're definitely not a try anything. You sometimes see a kind of quirky thing, but for the most part, it's driven by strong, financial sensibility, and so we've had to.
I guess I'm thinking, like Singapore, China has some like really crazy buildings, right? New York might have a couple by the High Line because it's where like they would put them, but I feel like. I don't know. I feel like Asia seems to be more excited about like experimenting on things. From an outsider point
absolutely.
of view. Right?
And I mean, I don't know about whether you'll see that in continuing in China. The president suggested maybe not. Their president. Yeah. But for sure, I think they're looking at some Western countries saying like, wow, they've got some really interesting things going on architecturally. We should do that. And that's true of Southeast Asia too. But in general, Taiwan, not so much. Yeah.
Would you guys ever look to evolve your office into like a design build or start to incorporate one of these other typically separate professions, such as the construction management or even like real estate or something like that?
Right. That's a good question that we've thought about a lot.
Right.
And we get asked a lot about the particularly design build aspect of it. And
are you a licensed contractor?
No. So
like we could be in a heartbeat though.
We've decided we don't want to be.
Really?
It's essentially I can do a really good job of things if I'm all in. So when we do those projects where we build part of it or all of it in the case of the installations, it takes all of me. Yeah. I can't bear to send something out the door where like every connection wasn't considered and worked through. And so if I imagine that happening at the scale of a building, the pace that I would be able to work at would be slowed, and the energy that I'd like to put into really just being an architect would be lost. And so I can't do it. And people have said, well, you could, that becomes a separate company. Someone could run it. No, I couldn't help myself. I'd be over there involved every day. And our aspirations are really to be architects. And so I think I want to draw the line there. Now, the real estate one is something that we consider more. I don't think it would ever become a major part of the office. I think, developing a chunk of land or two in the same way we have our own office as an experiment. And we could do it, but it would be, the hesitation on that one would be whether or not we could help ourselves from doing things that didn't make sense financially. I would just want to go crazy and we'd lose money. So I have a lot of friends who are doing that, and I really admire their self-discipline.
Or lack thereof, depending on the friend.
Right.
Yeah, I can understand that. But I mean, are you, with the house, the place that you're currently in, and it's undergone a lot of construction over the years, and your parents' house, your dad did a lot of work on it. But are you completing the projects, or is it a complete, or is it like a mess and things are always incomplete? Like the house I grew up in was always under manipulation, but never complete. So it's actually, I joke that actually after it being around for 30 or 40 years, it's actually less finished than it was, from day zero.
Right. It always looks complete.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, obviously you'd go there some moment and a wall's torn out. But no, I can't stand, I can't live like that.
That's good.
It always has to look, finished.
Yeah.
And I often go to great lengths to make it temporarily look finished enough, but it's always in a state of transition, but it always looks like it's acceptable.
Well, and if you have clients coming and everything, it needs to be up to a certain level. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's true. But then going back to the kind of the growth or evolution of your office, how big is it right now?
It is, counting Jenny and I, it's 8 plus 2 part-time people.
Oh, cool.
Oh, very nice.
And is your vision to grow it? Because it seems like the work you do is very literally hands-on sometimes. And you guys are very detailed, very specific, and super high quality. And, the question is, like, how does that work if you try to get it beyond a certain number? You become more detached from things, right?
Right. I think we're going to grow some. I think neither of us want to grow super fast. People are often surprised to hear that until a year and a half ago, we never had more than 2 or 3 employees, full-time employees. So the towers, most of those installations, we were 2 or 3, usually 2 full-time employees, and then we would hire people over the summers who are often involved in building. And in a couple cases, there were SCI-Arc classes, and so there were students involved. But so we've grown, point being, we've grown pretty fast just in the last year.
Wow.
We've more than doubled, and we've become just a more legit office. We're trying to do better paying and benefits and just like the things that, when you become a real office, you have to do. Yeah. But it does take it into a territory that it never occurred to me when I was younger. It used to be, until 5 years ago, you used to say, okay, how on earth are we going to get this done? And when you only have a couple projects and a couple employees, you could just say, well, we're just going to work harder.
Right.
I'll work all night and we'll get this done. And you reach a point when you get to 6, 8, 10 people where the amount of work that you're willing to do doesn't really make a dent. And so, financially, for example, back then, that would make a dent. But when you get to enough, it's just, you've really got to figure out how to make the office work financially as an office. And so, we've been putting our heads together on how to think more like a business. I don't think we're ever going to be an office where we're writing elaborate business models and all of that. It's just we're too kind of passion-driven. But the last few years have been an interesting learning experience in how to run a business and learn to grow. So, how much do we want to grow? I don't know. I think the office could get to, in 5 years, could get to 15. It scares me to think about more than 20 for the reasons you named. Just the amount of, knowing what's going on. It drives me crazy to think, like I said, things are going to go out the door and I don't know what's happening with them. But we don't have the desire, like, it won't grow in this. It won't grow in the sense that what we were doing, the kind of work we were doing 5 years ago, is not going to happen times 3 as we grow. Meaning the installations.
Okay.
So it's not like we're going to be doing 3 installations at a time.
Right.
We've made a very conscious effort to say we want to do 1 installation at a time, maybe 1 a year. I say that often, but it often winds up being every year or a couple of year.
Because why?
Because the building projects require more time, and if we have too many installations going, I dedicate all my time and energy to those. And it really is, despite my daily tendency to be distracted by the building thing, our interest actually, by making or doing the installations, our real interest is the buildings.
Right.
And I just want to make sure that we're allocating enough time or, pre-planning.
Right. By trying to limit to like 1 a year.
Yeah.
Right. That's smart. That makes sense. Because I could see where if you have a passion for making things and by hand and being involved in that way, and if it's like right there, and you see someone doing something, they could be doing it better. It's like, well, let me go help this person, and like half an hour is gone.
Yeah, absolutely. That happens a lot.
What's the for these installations, where are they getting built? Do you guys have a shop in the building or at the school, or until we had our property where they were built at the school. Mm-hmm. I think the first one no one knew, and we were actually building it in the parking lot. But the school became super supportive of us building those things. So we built several. Several of them were for the school. Right.
Most of them. But then we built one of them at a metal place, M&K Metals down in Gardena. Mm-hmm. The biggest one was built down there, but most of them in the last few years have just been built at our space. So do we have a shop? We don't have what most people would consider like a full open and closed shop. We have a relatively large space under a portion of the building, mm-hmm. Where we can build things and keep things dry. But we've built some really big things, like the Columbus building, the Columbus Pavilion that we built. That was all built in our space, and it filled the side yard, the backyard. Semis came and loaded them from Barbrick's restaurant next door. It all happened right there in our space.
What kind of equipment do you guys have? Table saw?
We have a table saw.
I know this is like very specific.
Yeah, I have the most compact tool closet that you have ever seen. So we don't have a lot of big equipment. I have a couple of welders and a dozen hand grinders. We have a lot of small equipment. Then we have some things that we've made, like we built a metal brake over the summer that had several dies, and we just made it ourselves.
Wait, a metal brake?
A metal brake for bending metal.
Oh, okay.
But we did something we hadn't done before. We'd typically bent 90-degree angles in metal, and we needed to make one that would bend different radii. So we made our own dies for it. And we hack a lot of things, like cheap. We have a roll bender, for example, that's like a $200 roll bender, but I've modified it so much and bought these. There are companies that make hacks for sometimes like Harbor Freight, the cheapest tools you can buy.
Yeah.
That will make dies that are way better, and you can put them on this cheap thing. So we do some silly things like that, and when it's only for one project, and it often is, it doesn't make sense not to do that. We also just don't have the space to buy big, expensive equipment.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of things. We have a couple of different benders. We have a radial draw bender, which is often used for like making roll cages for cars. Right. And then we have a roll bender that's cobbled together from a lot of things.
Harbor Freight is an amazing place. For people who don't know, it's a hardware shop, right? It's a chain.
Yeah.
But they have things that are so cheap.
Yeah.
Like I think the last thing we bought there was like a pneumatic nail staple gun, and it was like $10 or something like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. I don't know how they even make money.
It's ridiculous. And let's be honest, most of it is junk. if you're going to buy a wrench or something, actually, it's quite nice. You can get a wrench that's not going to break, but I wouldn't. If you buy something with a power cord, beware.
Yeah, it'll be good for 10 uses.
Yeah, I love this. There's a company called Swag Off-Road that is they make things that basically modify Harbor Freight tools. So,
Harbor Freight.
Yeah, they make the dies, or they will say, okay, if you want to make a hydraulic bender, you can buy this. A hydraulic bender might cost $3,000 to $4,000 if you just bought a new one, but they will say you can buy this $200 hydraulic jack and this little thing from Harbor Freight and this manual bender, and then they'll sell you several steel pieces, and you just weld them on there, and then you hack this thing together, and you've got what works like a $3,000 thing, but you got it for $500.
Do they have a YouTube channel? I feel like this is a YouTube thing.
They definitely have a YouTube channel. Yeah, heavy metal music is playing in the background.
The other thing we realized recently in terms of buying, tools and stuff is that through Facebook Market is the place.
Facebook Market.
Yeah, you can buy basically brand new power tools for really, really cheap. And we were curious as to why this is, and we found out it's because I guess what happens for Home Depot and Lowe's and a lot of these big places, when people return stuff, I always assumed they went back on the shelf. Apparently they don't. I don't know if this happens 100% of the time, but a lot of times they don't. They make these crates, a crate that has basically a mixed bag of tools, and guys or women will go and buy a crate for X thousands of dollars, kind of like like those storage, what do they call it? Storage wars, where the guys are standing at the, what do they call them?
Auction?
Yeah, like an auction. Yeah. And they're looking inside of the room to see what's in there.
You can't dig through it. It's just
exactly.
Yeah.
And so people will buy these crates and then resell the products and make a profit, but you can buy whatever it is for a third of the price, and it's brand new.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. We've done a lot of this hacking, but there are tools I won't skimp on.
Yeah.
I've had, if when it comes to a welder, don't buy a cheap one.
Right.
I've learned there are some things that you got to have a good one.
Because it explodes? I have no idea.
Because you want it to work. So I've had the same, I've used virtually every single project has been one welder that I bought 14 years ago.
What's the worst shop accident that you had?
These are things you don't say publicly.
Yeah, but you have all your fingers.
Let me say,
I think you have all your. I don't know.
Every
if you have all your
one of them, every worst accident happened to me, because I insist on doing all the things that no one else should do.
Right. Yeah. Because you don't want someone else to get hurt.
Right.
Okay. But that's okay. That's much more sure. That makes sense. That's reasonable.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We really, honestly, knock on wood, we haven't had any. We have funny things happen, but we haven't had accidents, and I don't know.
Funny
thank
things
God.
like
someone almost lost an arm, whatever.
I don't know. One of my favorite people on earth once was cleaning and decided that he was going to clean my boots in a bucket of acetone. And this story is still told. And
did they not know what acetone was?
I was a little upset about this.
Is he still your favorite person on earth?
He still is, yes.
I mean, at least it wasn't lacquer thinner, I suppose, but acetone would be pretty aggressive.
Yeah, it didn't.
I mean,
do you still have the boots?
No.
Oh man. It must get loud in the shop. I mean, does it disturb your kids upstairs? Or I guess you would probably stop working at a certain hour, right?
Yeah, we've tried to be polite. I mean, for one, we have neighbors around, and we've been really lucky, thankful that we haven't had any problems. Part of it is we're in this weird location where we're very isolated, and we're right on Hyperion, which is generally pretty loud. Mm-hmm. So if you put our house up on the hill next to neighbors, we'd have a big problem. But because we're right down there's a car garage 2 doors over and a restaurant next door. There's already a fair amount of noise, and so we haven't had any problem. And we don't work late into the night.
Do your kids understand what you guys are doing?
Oh, that's a good question.
Like, it's not like the typical architecture, my dad makes houses.
Right.
Like, you're always like making this crazy stuff and building it. Like, I mean, I know they're pretty young, but do you think they understand?
Yes and no. They... one mistake that I've made is all of this, so many of the things that we've built for them, I did it too young. So I built that first car, I think, he might have been 6 months old when I was building that car, because I was so excited. Yeah. And so by the time they're old enough to even use any of them, they're just not that interested.
Right.
That car, though, I pulled him through Silver Lake for 2 years. So everyone knew him and me as like the people with the crazy car.
Right.
We'd go through Trader Joe's with the thing, and it was quite a scene. But the tree house, for example, they don't remember a time when the tree house wasn't there.
Right.
So they don't get it in that sense. But they do know that our house isn't like other people's house, for example. Like the other kids are drawing homes with a pitched roof and a little door, and they draw boxes and
crazy lines.
I have
what's happening at your house?
Yeah, there was we've been doing this thing where most nights I go with them and they'll eat lollipops, like Tootsie Pops, and we've been making this art piece out of strips of Tootsie Pop wrappers. Hundreds of them, like a year's worth of Tootsie Pops. And I've been incorporating their drawings into it. And I've been looking at their drawings because I kind of give them card and they'll draw it on it. And then I go back through and decide what should go on there. I'm not done with this thing.
You're making them work without them knowing it.
Exactly. But there are several houses that they've drawn on there, and they're the weirdest houses ever. And it's not just weird like a little kid, draws a house that isn't right. They actually have like bizarre sawtooth roofs that you'd only see from our kids.
This is a modern house, and the teacher's like, "What are you talking about?"
Right.
I was wondering for the tricycles and the cart and things, if it must have taken quite a while to build them. If when they're going down a driveway in Trader Joe's, you're like, now be careful though, because this took me a lot of hours to build. You have to appreciate like the craftsmanship.
Or testing
the tricycle they almost never rode, the little cafe racer tricycle. I'm not quite sure why. I know part of it is when he was really interested in it, his legs weren't long enough to be able to use it. So that tricycle is in Taipei and will be returning any day now. So it's time to try again. I've kind of not worried about it. Like I just think I'd much rather they show some wear and tear. Like we just had the show in Taipei and both of those, the car and the tricycle, were in there. In the car, you can clearly see we've used it. Mm-hmm. It's not torn up, but it looks like it's got some wear and tear. And I just didn't worry about it. I never beat it up, but I just think it's showing that our kids actually used it.
Yeah. Right.
Meant some more. When I built those, I often snuck them into other projects. We've done this with a lot of things. We're building one project, and because we have a certain welder set up for steel or aluminum or something, we'll make some smaller things along the way. So there's my favorite image of us building the 3DS Culinary Project. It's right at the moment where all the steel is in place, and it's this sort of crazy roller coaster looking thing of thousands of pieces of steel. And there's just me standing in the middle of the image with my welding gear on, and it looks like I'm working on the 3DS Culinary Project. But if you look closely, I'm actually building a tricycle. But another thing we did was when we built the screenplay project, which was a lot of rope. Mm-hmm. We did several furniture pieces at the same time. So there are often little side projects where everyone's grinding, and I'm thinking, what else can I make out of this same thing?
Do you? What happens to these installations and things afterwards? Like for some of them, or one of them, you managed to bring it back.
Yeah. But
for a lot of them, like, do they get? I don't know. What happens to them?
Yeah. When we first did them, we didn't think about that very much. When we did density fields and when we did the stair at SCI-Arc, they were just cut down, and sometimes by us. So when they were aluminum, they would just get recycled. And some of the bigger ones, that's happened. But the more we've done them, the more we've tried to plan for their future, for both just environmental reasons, sure. But also just the sensibility of putting that much effort into it. Seems like they ought to last longer.
Right.
So like screenplay, for example, is SF MoMA acquired that one. There's another part of screenplay that we're giving to a client.
That's cool.
The Columbus project will probably it won't stay in its current location, but we're in talks with the city there to put it somewhere else. So we've at this point we almost always make them removable,
right?
So they can go somewhere else. The thing we just did in Taipei, a kind of stair-like chandelier installation, that was designed so that another building it went in an atrium space. That you could look down on it and up at it. It was designed so that a building will eventually be designed with the same kind of atrium, so it'll be placed somewhere else.
Where did your design sensibilities, style preferences, etc., come from? Is there a clear kind of lineage as to how this evolved for you guys to kind of where you are now?
Right. To some extent, I should probably say, first, just big picture. I often think of like how I got to where I am as being the strangest, most diverse mix of influences. So when I first got out of undergrad, I went to New York and I worked for a very short period of time for a corporate office. What definitely was not the right fit for me. And then I went to work for Lebbeus Woods and Toshiko Mori at the same time. I was working for Toshiko during the day and Lebbeus at night.
Wow.
Why those two? Like why? I mean, I know why those two. I still admire both of them. But why someone would choose that wide of a spectrum is a little baffling. Yeah. I know. But Lebbeus's work really, really interested me, and I really wanted to build. And Toshiko was building, and so when I went back to school after 3 years, and I went back to New York, and I did more or less the same thing. I went to work for Toshiko full time. I wanted to know how to run projects, and I wanted to run projects that were small enough and manageable enough and close enough to the principal that I could learn. So I was working mostly on houses in Florida that Toshiko was doing at the time, and I wasn't working with or for Lebbeus so much anymore, but I was teaching with Lebbeus while I was working for
teaching
Toshiko.
At Columbia?
Teaching at Cooper.
Oh, okay, right.
Anyway, the question is, was the influences. So then when we came to LA and we began working, we did a couple of wood projects. We did our own loft. We as a practice were doing these competitions and realizing it wasn't the right fit for us. We did one that everyone did. We did the Palos Verdes Art Center competition. Every person of our generation did that, and we got third place. And we thought, we're on our way now. And then we did 7 or 8 more. We didn't place in any of them, and so we got a little frustrated. But we also just thought, I don't know if competitions are our way. Right. So when we came here, we started. We just said, look, if we just dedicate a little money, we put our own labor into it, we're going to get a lot further. We're going to get a project for sure. So we're doing these projects that were out of wood, our own loft. We did a deck for her parents, and I'm still proud of the projects. I think they were good projects, but I don't think they were as interesting as the things that we sort of began doing after that.
Right.
And so right after that, Density Fields happened. It was the first metal project. And we did a couple of those, and we weren't really, on one hand, we said, let's do something more interesting or more that sort of feels more experimental, but we didn't yet target, what is it we're working on? And we did a couple of those, and then I think we started to ask ourselves, largely because of I think, a very positive pressure coming from the environment of SCI-Arc, we started asking ourselves, what are we doing? Who are we as architects? Where do we want to go? How are we going to get there? How do we do the most interesting things possible? And how do we get them built?
Right.
And we were sort of looking to our commonalities at the time. Jenny did a thesis that was a train station in Amsterdam. It was all about these lines moving into the city and sort of pulling them up like rubber bands to form this station. And I had done a large number of projects that weren't explicitly talking about line, but they were a reoccurring issue. Everything I had done, most things I had done, I have projects from undergrad still in the office that were often combining these lacy, filigree qualities with more pure geometries. And we were asking ourselves whether or not this common interest could find its way into the projects. And so we just started kind of talking about the projects in that way. And the more we talked about it, the more ideas were building, and the more it would lead to, we should try this thing next time. And so that was sort of how we got to line. The one thing that I would also point to is a lot of the language, aside from it just being a kind of line language, a lot of it came from this one moment when we started bending. So the first one we did, it wasn't a bent project, and then we did the pendulum plane project where we started bending, and it changed the aesthetic. But we did it because we could get more complexity and material and more joints out of the bending. So it was quite literally the process of building them that changed the aesthetic interest into more curvature.
Right. That's really interesting. It's weird. Yeah. You were talking about like looking backwards, you can kind of tell now that the interest in line kind of existed in undergraduate school. And I assume it wasn't necessarily because there was a particular professor or class that said, we're going to look at lines. It just kind of was there. Right. And it's really fascinating to me how that works. That there, I don't know, like there's the almost embedded or these preference is not the right word maybe, but these investigations that exist and they're common between projects, even if a project is like a jewelry, a piece of furniture, or urban design. There's these kind of common issues that you can find that tend to almost haunt a person or stay with a person. It's like really fascinating to me. I don't know what it is, because looking back for me, I definitely see there's some common things I'm always wrestling with, but again, when I'm doing the project, I don't think about it. And then afterwards, I'm like, wait a second, there's something. I'm still dealing with the same issue, after 12 different things. It's weird. Yeah.
Well, if you've heard some of our lectures, you've probably heard me say before that when I went to school, instructors were very much that when you get a new project, you need to almost like pretend like you don't have a thing you work on.
Right.
You need to go to the site. You need to ask what the site wants. Right. You're like a child looking freshly at this new site. And I think I believed that for a long time. Yeah. And then when I started to ironically look at other architects more closely, it seems like that's where you should do that in school, right? Yeah. But it's actually later in life that most people do that. Mm-hmm. And says what architects do I really admire and how did they deal with that problem? All those architects that we admired, they actually, I think, had certain. They were sensitive to issues of site and place, but they often said, "What can the thing I do contribute to that site or place?" And so those architects, and I'm talking about people like Friato, Antonio Gaudí, Eero Saarinen, they had a thing. Saarinen had a couple things. But they didn't start fresh by any stretch of the imagination. They had a thing. And so I do think at some point in life, an architect's got to ask, am I working on an architectural issue? Am I bringing something to the table?
Yeah.
I will say about that, though, that I don't think people, when they're very young, should be super worried about that. I do notice that increasingly students are worried, and we as instructors are partially to blame, that they haven't found their thing, and there's not a clear trajectory. When people do a thesis, we ask them to do that, but I do think that if a person has decided when they're 19 or 20 years old that they know what they're going to, the exact kind of architect they're going to be, wow, they're really going to limit their ability to continue learning and growing and evolving in unexpected ways.
Right.
I think you should have a thing, but the whole point of it should be that it is absorbing every influence, similar or different, until you've reached a certain point where it's robust enough to continue to grow on its own.
Right. So you had mentioned this is something you're seeing a bit more often now. Would you say that's within the last 10 years ish? I'm curious, when,
yeah.
Because one of the questions that I always have is trends is not the right, the kind of whatever trends that student bodies have, and whether or not they coincide with the advent of different technologies, or like, what is it? Is it because we're on our phones all the time, or like, what is it that makes, generally speaking, a body of students lean toward one direction or the other, Yeah,
I don't know. Part of it is that education has become more focused, and that's been good and bad. Like, education asking, if you're doing a thesis, like, what's your thing? Like, you got to start developing that thing earlier and earlier if you want to do a good thesis.
Right.
So I don't know, it's a tough balance.
I mean, I think it's a smart move. At the very least, everyone has preferences deep down, and at the very least, you have to be, I feel like, at least honest to know that you have those and to be aware of them. I think if you totally ignore or claim you don't have any, and you're coming to every project like totally clean, then whether or not that produces the best singular piece of architecture, that's one question. But the other is that, well, I know, but you do have you're a human being, you have your own preferences, your own way of seeing things, and so you've at least got to be aware of what that is. And if you choose to run with it or ignore it, either way or somewhere between, but you should know it at least.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the thing this is a slightly different issue, but just thinking about students and like what's the difference in the last 10 years. I'm not the first person to say this, but I do think a lot about like what's changed and what's the mentality of a person coming out of school today that's different. And there's definitely a sense, and I don't want to be like an old fogey who's like, kids today, I really think I'm not like that. But I think that increasingly people feel like, I got to get out of school and I got to start my office right away and I got to get famous really quickly. And proof of that is almost every person I know, as soon as they get out of school, whether they have their own office or not, they have a name for their office. It's their Instagram handle or whatever. Like, why is that the case?
Yeah.
No one, 20 years ago, no one did that. You went out, you worked for an architect. And so I think, I worked for architect, for Toshiko for several years, gained really valuable experience. I kind of wish I had done a little more. I didn't learn enough, for example, about running a business. And if you never do that, that would be a really frightening thing. I just think architecture is a really long, slow career. And I just wish people would be a little more patient about it. You're going to live many lives in architecture from the moment you go to school to time you go to school to working for someone, to then having a struggling office, to winning the Pritzker someday. It's a long, slow thing.
Oh yeah, look at all the people that run the Pritzker. They're not exactly young guys.
Exactly.
They're on the other side of the hill.
Exactly. Imagine how many lives most of those offices lived.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That to be patient and to almost just enjoy the long-term process, which is like really difficult to do when you're younger and you're trying to make a name for yourself, or you've already found your office name. It's different, but I think that's a really good point. And we've had a lot of friends, colleagues, people we know who graduated, worked for a few years, maybe even less or something, and started their office, for different reasons. Sometimes they just can't stand to work at somewhere else, and other reasons because they think they're ready. And it's a reoccurring thing we hear is that, I wish I had, stayed under the tutelage of so-and-so, or worked at a better office for, 3 or 4 X many more years, just to kind of get certain things under my belt, because it would have made the next 3 chapters in the life like much easier than rushing out of the gate.
Right. Also, how are you going to get clients?
I don't know.
That's the difficult part. And that exists until the day you die. Even if you live a long life, most people are still trying to, Frank Gehry is still trying to get jobs. Most of them are probably coming through the door, but he's still going after jobs. And people don't think about the lifelong issue. And I think a thing I really caution people on really often is, there's a huge misconception that you can go out into the world, you start your office, and you take the jobs you can get, and
you might get one interesting moment, but the next one will get two interesting moments. And then the next thing you know, you're setting the world on fire with the most interesting project ever. That's just not generally how it works. And and an example, the proof of that is, think of the number of offices you can think of that really started in that way. They started doing relatively boring things, and it grew into them being a world-class, interesting office. I can think of a couple, but not very many. Most offices that got to that point were really stubborn, and they did what they wanted to do, and they struggled to do that for a really long time. So no one's going to, basically, clients hire you because you can show them the kind of work that you've done, or they've seen it and they want that. So they're not going to come to you and say, I want you to do this really interesting project because I saw all that uninteresting stuff you did in the past.
Right.
This doesn't happen. So I think people have to keep in mind as they start their own office that if you're not able to start out with something pretty interesting, or in some cases do it. In our case, we just said we're going to
do it yourself.
We're going to start it ourselves.
Right.
Yeah. Then it might not be the right time.
And I suppose you could almost fall into a pattern of accepting more and more work that's not interesting if you have employees and whatnot.
Absolutely.
And then a decade goes by or whatever. And you have all these projects that you didn't really quite want to end up there.
Absolutely. No, we still ask ourselves, if a project comes through the door that we feel like we can do something interesting, but is it the right, it might help feed people, but is it the right project for us? Do we really want this project? I don't know when you stop asking yourself that, but we still have to ask.
If you're Gensler, maybe?
Yeah. Well, I don't know who they stopped quite a while ago.
They're crazy. They have compared to other, businesses, they're not big, but for architectures, they have, what was the stat? Was it 10,000 people? I don't know. Something crazy. They could occupy a city with all of their employees. Yeah. It doesn't make sense to me.
We many years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, we were competing against Gensler. It was just us and Gensler.
Oh, what?
And it was, shocking. We had 2 employees.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a secret. I think I can say what it was. It was a secret at the time, but many years have gone by. So it was the offices for Hulu.
Oh, really?
Oh.
Yeah. It would have been a great project. They were looking at a couple different buildings and trying to imagine what the office would look like if they renovated those buildings. And I was very happy with what we did. We felt very confident that we would get the job. And we did a lot of things we wouldn't normally do, like we did these sort of vignettes that were talking about their employees, and we really thought about it thoughtfully in terms of the culture of the place. But we realized after we lost that what Gensler had done was they sent 9 or 10 people all day long, one day, and they walked around and they talked to every employee.
Oh.
Nothing we could have done could have competed with that, on a
that's crazy
certain level. So
that's unfair. Come on.
It felt unfair, but I didn't want to stand up and stop. And this is not fair. But it felt unfair.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, we've had, not at that scale or anything close to that, but competitions where there's a really small team of us, we're working full time and we do this thing. We're really proud of it. Conceptually, we think it makes sense. It's really cool. And we get to the competition, and we did all right in it, and then the first prize winner, we find out that they're all graduate students at Yale or one of these Ivy Leagues. There's 12 students involved, and it was a course. They had 3 faculty members on it, and they did actual scientific research about the water and all this stuff, and they have giant boards and test tubes with water. It's okay, well.
We just went with our crazy ideas,
right.
But they had a whole, team of experts there.
That's what you have to do. That's what it is.
Right.
I thought ours was conceptually more interesting, but whatever.
Well, then we're maybe we can team up on the next one.
Yeah. But that's where competitions, going back briefly to what you were talking about, can be really difficult because I don't know how it works for professional competitions like BuiltWorks, if they're mostly anonymous or not, but it's such a hit or miss, game. I feel like you don't know.
Yeah, we swore off competitions, like I said, for many years, but we've kind of come back to them because we went many years. We haven't done one in a year and a half or so, but we went many years where we weren't doing them, and we were doing all of these installations, and we were just sort of stepping back and saying, "Are we still on? Are still getting where we want to go?" And we felt like we were doing really interesting work, but we weren't working on buildings. We weren't applying it. With some exception, we were doing like the tower in Taipei, where we were applying as much as we could, but there's just no way you can go at a residential tower with the same level of gusto that you could go at an installation or, say, a museum competition. And so we said maybe it's time to go back to trying some competitions, not with the idea of winning, but we wanted to be ready. We still want to be ready when that museum comes along, with ways to apply the kind of installation work, in the richest way possible. Yeah. So. I haven't, we're back to competitions. I think there's some value in doing it. Don't do it to win. Yeah, right. But you can, if you're always saying we're not going to win, you're not going to hone your skills in designing buildings and testing ideas. Yeah.
Well, we burned through an hour and a half. I want to wrap it up so we have a few minutes to chat afterwards. Unless there's anything else that you wanted to proclaim on here.
Proclaim?
I don't think so.
I don't know words.
I've made too many of those and regretted them.
Any, new tricycle coming out? Or
No, new tricycle. No, trying to get the ones I have back. But look out for that Tootsie Pop artwork.
Oh, that sounds pretty interesting, actually. But this was really fantastic, and thanks so much for coming on. I enjoyed it. And this was a lovely chat. Thanks.
I agree. Likewise. Thank you.
Are you
all right, everybody. Thank you for listening to this week's episode, and shout out to our guest, Dwayne. He was a pleasure to speak with. Such a nice guy.
Yeah, we got to hang out with him more. I want to go see their office because it sounds like a really fun place to work.
Do you think he would let me ride in one of the carts he made?
I don't think so.
Probably should make not. It awkward. We are on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. If you like what we're doing, then please leave us a review. If you're new to the show, welcome, welcome, welcome. If you've been around for a bit of time, a review would be amazing. We try to ask for that every week. Sometimes we forget, but those make a difference, and it means a lot to us. Reach out to us on any of the social media platforms. We also have a design hotline, which is 213-222-6950. So if you have any questions about design, architecture, life, relationships, whatever, hit that hotline and we will play your message on the show or read your text. You can also text it, and then we have a whole conversation around it. We have these shows called Design Companions where we do that, and those are hugely successful for the listeners and the people that call in, of course.
Very chatty tonight. Yeah. And, you don't have to have a question. If you want to share with us your favorite joke, your favorite architect, your favorite memory of your whole life, why not?
Favorite pair of shoes.
Just share. Just feel free to share for, Yeah.
Sharing's caring, Care Bears. Don't be...
All right, I think that's enough.
What else is going on? We got some really good interviews coming up, and some more content. And, we also have these tips and tactics episodes where they're basically like helpful guides, right, for young designers. So like how to do portfolio, how to do an interview, which is not as straightforward as you might think, how to apply for jobs, how to pass the AREs. If you have an idea for one of these tips and tactics episodes that we have not done yet, then definitely let us know, because we are brainstorming currently for what future ones we could do. So reach out to us, and we thank you for listening. It means a lot. We're at 165 now episodes. It's kind of crazy. We're going to keep going forward. We no. We love it. We're going to keep going, and we really appreciate that you're supporting us. So we will talk to you again next week.
Maybe.
Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.